I think in my own case, it was just a matter of doing what I enjoyed. Yes, I grew up in a small village in Yorkshire, and the village was built around a worm mill. And my father was in the building section of that operation. But my father and mother both left school at the age of 13 and were in full-time employment from then on. So different times. And I was born just before the war, so they were hard times for my third to my seventh year was during the wartime. And we used to hear the German bombers going overhead. There was an air raid shelter at the top of our street, and when the planes were coming over, we were warned, and we'd go and sit in the air raid shelter lit by candles. And people would say, "Is that one of ours, or is it the other?" This was in Yorkshire, in the sort of middle from east to west across England. And the German bombers were heading for places like Liverpool and Manchester. Manchester was 50 miles away, and on occasions we could see the southwestern sky red with the fires. But we never were bombed ourselves. I was telling the man who fitted me for the formal attire yesterday, part of the attire was braces, which I've not worn in, it must be 70 years. So that brought back all these memories. All the children wore clogs with wooden soles and steel, like horses' hoofs, in the case of the boys. And on dim, frosty mornings, we would run along the road on our way to school and kick our steel heels against the flagstones, and showers of sparks would come up, something I'd not thought of for 50 years. It was really a matter of keeping out of trouble. I just took the easy way. So I found chemistry and physics easier to keep out of trouble than English literature, for example. Yeah. We were subjected to Shakespeare for year after year, and I really never understood what it was on about. So it wasn't any great enthusiasm for chemistry and physics. That's not true. Towards the end, I was really interested in mathematics. And there were different teaching streams in those days. In the sixth form, you could do chemistry, physics, and maths. And for some reason I've never understood, biology was not represented at the school. The boys who wanted to do biology went to the local girls' grammar school. And that may have been the reason why many of them went for biology, I don't remember. But there were two streams in the science area. One was for chemistry, physics and maths, which is what I did. And then there was physics and double maths, so-called. The mathematics there was much more advanced than anything I ever did. But I was offered a place in physics at Oxford, and I really, at that stage of my life, I did enjoy physics and maths. But I felt that I'd be way behind the people who'd done physics and double maths. And where I got the idea of doing this, I don't know, but there was an exam called responsions in those days, which normally would have been done at the end of the first year at Oxford. But for some reason, I was prepared by the school to do responsions before I went up to Oxford. And during that period, I met the chemistry don, who was a terrific guy, a man by the name of John Baltrop. And somehow or other, this completely ignorant 17-year-old on the spot decided he wanted to do chemistry. on meeting John Baltrop in the quadrangle. And I ended up doing chemistry, but it wasn't any great enthusiasm for chemistry. It was just a simple way out. I went to the local grammar school and stayed there for 8 years, it must have been, until I sat for the Oxford scholarships and was admitted there. Spent 7 years in Oxford, good times and bad. But the place itself is lovely. I really like Oxford. Then my wife and I were married just a couple of weeks before we left for America to go to Caltech for a postdoc. And that was an eye-opener. I mean, very few people owned motor cars in those days, where I came from. We found ourselves in a position where we could own a car within 2 or 3 months of being in America. So it's an entirely new life. This was during the Kennedy years. We arrived 2 weeks before the missile crisis. And of course, Los Angeles would have been a prime target. But at the time, we didn't seem to be all that worried. I don't know how this came about. And whilst we were there, Kennedy was assassinated. I remember that very well. On the day of the funeral, I guess it must have been, there's a mountain, Mount Wilson. It's famous for its telescope, just above Pasadena, about 6,000 or 7,000 feet from memory. And on the day of the funeral, I walked up to the top and back, and that was an experience. Then we went to Stanford for a year or 15 months, and I worked then with Henry Taube, who was a Nobel Prize winner in the middle 80s, and he was an inspiration. He was a great man. Caltech and Stanford were really, the chemistry departments were really very different places. Caltech was cutthroat, competitive, one-upping all the time. Quite the opposite at Stanford. Everybody was friendly, and it was a much nicer place to spend time. So in Pasadena, our daughter was born, and in Stanford, our son was born. And then I was looking for jobs with a family, and the prospects were not looking all that good, but I wrote around, and in those days I made applications by hand, just handwritten notes, and was accepted at Melbourne, and we've been there ever since. We arrived in Melbourne in early 1966, February 1966. In June of that year, we bought the house that we're still in. So I had the same job, the same house, and the same wife for now getting on for 70 years. Yeah, I do enjoy it, especially if I'm well prepared. I guess it's just pure egotism or something, just holding forth. I try to make things as clear and simple as I can, make a big effort there, or I used to do. I've been retired. I retired at the age of 67 in 2004, but I've continued to do first-year tutorials, more for my benefit than for the students, I think, but just to keep the old grey matter working. But it's a losing battle. Things are going all the time. But the first-year tutorials are good. I enjoy that. With regard to the teaching and the sort of ideas that led to the research leading to this, it wasn't directly to do with teaching. We got a new boss in chemistry, in organic chemistry at Melbourne in 1974, a man by the name of Don Stranks, who was well known as a kineticist in those days. And he wanted to reorganize things, especially the first year teaching, which were huge classes. And he wanted to build some new models of various basic inorganic structures. He gave a number of us different jobs to improve the teaching. My job was to build these models of basic inorganic structures like sodium chloride and wurtzite and zinc blende and rutile. And this was not my area at all. I had an organic background. My DPhil at Oxford was in organic chemistry, and I only sort of made the transition towards inorganic chemistry during my time first at Caltech, where I was looking at iron enzymes that my supervisor there and myself were totally ignorant of, and it was quite enjoyable in a way to grope my way forward in that area and see possibilities. And then I went with Henry Tauby, and he was a full-time inorganic chemist, and he was terrific. And I got the job at Melbourne in the inorganic chemistry department, so that's how I got this job of building the models. But my background was not in solid-state chemistry, but in organic chemistry. So it's new to me, and I had to calculate all the angles that the workshop would drill holes into these wooden balls. And in those days, we did have a workshop with 7 full-time, very, very skilled men. Whereas now the bureaucracy has expanded and science has declined, and we no longer have a workshop. I would have thought it was impossible for a chemistry department to exist without a workshop. Anyhow, so we had these very skilled men taking a wooden sphere and determining angles and depths of the drill had to go and so on. It requires quite a lot of skill. How they did it physically, I don't know, but we had large numbers of balls, especially made for particular structures. It was whilst putting these things together that the thought occurred, what if we substitute this particular ball by a molecular unit that had connections in the same directions as the rods were heading? And then we'd put chemically active groups at the tips of each of these arms and find some way of linking them together. And then the question was, if you mix these things up, would they magically assemble themselves into the same connectivity as we see in the model? Or would they just give an awful mess, a complicated bird's nest of the stuff that you couldn't handle? And it turned out in general that they were nicely crystalline. They did assemble themselves in the way we intended. I did fully expect that it was going to be a waste of time, yeah. But when it worked, I wasn't all that surprised. I was pleased, but what I did was more like art and architecture than science. I think in my own case, it was just a matter of doing what I enjoyed. And thought of being successful or not so really didn't enter into it. It was just a matter of, doing experiments that seemed exciting. So I don't know whether that's a quality that all what you call successful scientists would have, but that was the case in my case. I worked very closely, right from the middle 60s when I first arrived in Melbourne. I had a very close friend, Bernard Hoskins, who was a crystallographer. And we collaborated and were close friends for getting on for 40 years until he died in 2002. He did all the real science, the numerical hard data, bond lengths and bond angles and things. And really what I was doing was hand-waving, sorry about the language, arty-farty sort of stuff. And I tended to just do simple experiments where you mixed A with B with an intention of getting something. But in the first days, first years, you often got nothing that you expected. Without Bernard's close friendship, because there were lots of crystallographic problems, and if I'd not had that close contact, day after day, we'd have lunch together and so on. Without that, it wouldn't have come to the stage that it did. I was very fortunate to work with Bernard. My wife, until a few years ago, did all the cooking. But more recently, in the last 10 years, I would have taken over a bit more of the cooking. And I quite like cooking fish, and I like to eat fish. So the fishmonger's open on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings. And I regularly, for the last 10 years, have gone, bought the fish. And then I I'm usually on my way to the lab, so there's a refrigerator there where I can keep the fish. I get enough fish for 2 days, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And I cook the fish and potatoes and vegetables and so on. And I'm in the middle of cooking the fish when the phone call came. So when it was finished, I continued with the meal preparation and we ate it. It wasn't any big deal. The first year tutorials on Thursday morning, so yeah, the next morning it didn't occur to me to do anything other than give the tutorial that I'd prepared for. Yeah. I was accosted by, I think, hundreds of people with cameras who wanted to have pictures taken. They were all young people, they 18 to 22-year-olds, but I couldn't imagine doing anything like that when I was young, but times change.